What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about Gatewalkers, a day before its release tomorrow. But Gatewalkers is an interesting blend of action RPG on top of some survival elements. And before we kick the video off, the developer of this indie project, A2 Softworks, did send me a copy of the game so I could take an early look at it, which is of course how I'm bringing it to you a little bit early. But Gatewalkers is, again, an interesting blend of ARPG and survival elements. So the combat is relatively what you would expect from this type of game, very hack and slash, but most everything after that includes a lot of elements from a more crafting and survival perspective. For instance, you don't really get a whole lot of loot from enemies, but rather you craft a lot of your upgrades and items, as well as collect resources from both the enemies you defeat as well as the surrounding environment. You can also play the game in co-op with 3 other people, so a total of 4. But before we dive much farther into it than that, let's first talk about the structure of the title. We are on our way to becoming a Gatewalker at the start of the game, as the world that we inhabit has started to die off, and thus we are looking for resources elsewhere, and we travel to various worlds via the gate, which teleports you there, and then it's your job to survive as well as take on missions, of course, giving the game a little bit of procedural generation as things unfold, though there are of course set story missions and the like, so that's a general idea of what you can expect for this title. From there though, let's start talking about crafting and resources and how that blends into progression. So for crafting, more or less what you'd expect, you gather materials from all over the place, defeating enemies and then skinning them or harvesting whatever they've got, chopping down trees, harvesting plants, and then you use all of those raw materials via your crafting menu, or back at base, the crafting stations, if you will, that will then allow you to craft various materials or process them into other refined goods that then let you make equipment out of it. Equipment is especially important in this game because this is where most of your skills are coming from, as this is a relatively classless game, and much of how your character performs is down to what kind of gear they are in. For instance, a hammer will give you certain skills, a staff will give you others, so much of what you can do is based on what you have equipped. But it doesn't end there, of course, because in order to craft the better stuff, you have to unlock them via progress points, which are effectively your research into various things that you can then craft or upgrade. And you get these simply by exploring the world or turning in a currency to an NPC, which will give you progress points, and then you spend these to unlock various recipes, which allows you to craft them, giving you access to better equipment, thus allowing you to do more, which is more or less your gameplay loop. But while that's a relatively straightforward concept for a lot of games, then we start taking a look at the survival elements at play here, which from what I played are relatively tame, but you do have to look after them, which includes the basic things like hunger and thirst, but also a sort of insanity mechanic, which basically means when it's nighttime out, you'll have to fight extra enemies if you don't have a light source, such as a torch. But where it gets much more interesting is the worlds themselves. Each world you go to, depending on what kind of world it is, will usually have some sort of elemental hazard, say heat, cold, that kind of thing, and you'll have to have the appropriate equipment to counteract that in order to be effective on that particular world. All while you, of course, track down enemies in this sort of sci-fi setting, which makes for a pretty cool indie title. And, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can play through it in co-op as well, and there's a pretty strong case for doing so, as this will make gathering resources on your end much easier, as when you are playing co-op and somebody harvests a resource, all of the characters present get that resource, which will make you much more effective at gearing up and taking on bigger and bigger challenges, which is where I think a lot of the more extensive gameplay will come from, but you can of course play it in single player as well. So all in all, if you like ARPGs or more survival oriented games, you might want to check this one out, but I would keep in mind that this is an indie title, and as such it can be a little unwieldy at times, especially when it comes to moving around and managing the telegraphs you've probably already seen on screen for your attacks. And on top of that, while I think this is an interesting enough title as it stands, I don't know what the launch price is. I didn't get that information anywhere. It's not on their Steam page. It wasn't in the information they handed off to me when they gave me the Steam key. Because if you're unaware, there's usually a sort of info packet, like a one-pager that they give you that explains a lot of stuff in terms of things like price, what they're aiming for, that kind of thing. But I didn't get the price, of course, though from what I've seen, I think if they can keep it in that sort of $20 to $30 range, I think they would be pretty good to go, as the core gameplay itself is pretty solid. But that is pretty much everything I've got for you guys today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this look at Gatewalkers. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.